On Black Narcissus, we all expected to go on location to India. And we were greatly surprised when Michael Powell, the director, told us the entire film was going to be made at Pinewood Studios in England. After the film was released, I believe Mickey got a letter from someone in India who said that they knew the locations, they'd seen them.
Every time I saw the Arches logo, I knew I was in for something special. Then I saw the name Cardiff attached with that. And I knew that this was a very, very unique, I was about to undergo a very, very unique experience. And so in a funny way, I became very much aware of his name.
Jack Cardiff happened to fall into their laps at just the time when they were making three of their greatest films, A Matter of Life and Death, Black Narcissus, and The Red Shoes, and of course contributed so enormously to those three great films.
In Black Narcissus, we had a studio product that actually looked better than if they had done it in the Himalaya Mountains, you know.
The medium of expression, the color cinematography, and the script and the acting are very much all of a piece. It's a perfect English melodrama.
I was most impressed because that he gave me half of my performance with the lighting.
Light comes through the front, obviously through the lens, and there's a prism here, which is this is the soul of the Technicolor camera. 25% of the light comes straight through the prism onto the one film in this gate here. That's the green record. And then the other rest of the light, 75% of the light, comes through and is reflected onto a bipack. This is a bipack of the red and the blue records. And of course, the magazine holds three films. The cameraman used to receive, after each day, the three negatives, the three primary negatives, one color picture to give him a guide how he was doing. The camera itself was quite reasonable, but the blimp, to keep the noise down, was enormous. It was probably over 4 foot high and at least about 2 foot wide and very heavy.
When you see how big that thing was, how they did it, I don't know. I mean, they did call it the Enchanted Cottage because it was so huge.
These freeless sprockets, they do nothing except that. But I used to put on this Bay Act and say, I think I'll put a bit more green here, a little less blue there. And they believed it. They thought I was creating color with the camera. It's terrific stuff. At the end of the picture, the cameraman would collect these, put on one sheet, or Technicolor would do it for him. I have several, and they're great fun to look at them.
I think one has to understand at that time films were still films were still entertainment as opposed to today. No, today they're entertainment too. But at that time they were coming out of the old Hollywood system, and there was there were westerns, there were genre films, and Technicolor was used for heightening the genre in the 40s and 50s. Color was still relegated to films as a special element rather than what happened in the late 60s and the early 70s where all films became color.
Over here, we use Technicolor mostly for musicals and big outdoor pictures. And the producers wanted all the color they could get because it cost them, I believe it was about 25% you added to your budget to get Technicolor.
I saw it as a wonderful exercise for all of us to produce a real perfect color work of art.
I found out that Technicolor people had come over to interview the operators at Denham to choose one young operator to be trained in Technicolor. And some operators that had already been in for this interview, and they came out shaking because the technical questions were absolutely very, very tough. So when it came to my turn, I said right away, well, I'm afraid that on the technical side, I'm absolutely zero. And there's a shocked silence. And they said, well, how do you think you're going to get on in the film business? And I said, well, I study painting and light in buildings and so on. And they asked me which side of the face did Rembrandt light. I took a chance on that one and said this side, and of course it would be reversed in an etching. And then I talked about Peter de Hook and his interiors and the camera obscura and that stuff. And the next day I learned that I had been chosen.
Michael always talked to me when I first met him about how Jack had begun in the Technicolor plants, and he knew the process from the inside out. And since Michael wanted to use it in a unique way, it was definitely clear that Jack was the man for him.
It was a wonderful combination because you had Michael, as I said, who was daring and running around and doing outlandish things, and Emmerich, who was a brilliant writer anyway, he would be the one who occasionally would say to Michael, well, I think this is going too far because of this or that, and he'd usually be right.
Michael, Emmerich, and Jack all had very strong visions, and you know that's always wonderful when you have people with that powerful force running through them.
British cinema during the 30s and 40s had a reputation amongst British filmgoers and also certainly amongst foreigners of being terribly kind of polite and genteel. Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger would have none of that. They were interested in emotion being explored and exposed.
You're sure there's no question you're dying to ask me?
None.
But they were trying to find a proper way, if you like, for English emotions to be revealed and on screen.
I think you have let yourself fall into thinking too much of Mr. Dean. Sister, don't you realize what you're doing? What you're running the risk of losing in yourself? Sister, I must make you see before it is too late.
All the same, I've noticed you're very pleased to see him yourself.
If that was in your mind, it's better said. I think you're out of your senses.
I was fairly stroppy, and I had my own views about how to play Sister Ruth. She didn't always agree with Mickey's. So we had one or two rows about it, and on one occasion, Mickey walked off the set, and Jack came up and said, are you ready now? What do you want us to do, Mickey? And Mickey said, she'll tell you. So Jack came up to me and said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I thought I'd do this and that and so on. So we set it up, and then Jack called Mickey back and said, do you want to see what we've arranged? He said, no, shoot it. And when they'd shot it, he said, well, it wasn't what I wanted, but it's very good, print it. So that went off quite smoothly.
Good evening. Sister Ruth?
I can't stand it any longer. I left the order. I gave up my vows. I finished with them up there.
Whatever Mickey did was extremely creative and original, and he had this wonderful backup of this fantastic cameraman.
He collected around him the best technicians that were available, and he had a brilliant art director, Alfred Junger, a German who was quite brilliant, and he used to make the most wonderful sketches.
Alfred Junger, the designer, and Jack Cardiff, the cameraman, would have endless arguments and conversations about settings. First of all on paper, and then when they're painted, then in detail, and then when the set was there.
And he was, I would say, Teutonic in his method of talking to me about the way that his set should be lit. And I was a little bit overawed by him.
Sometimes Alfred would have to tear half of it down. Jack pointed out that the kind of lighting that he wanted for this particular sequence couldn't be done because there was a wall in the way. Alfred would be furious, but together they just worked miracles. I mean, you never get the slightest feeling of studio, do you?
This set there was literally a few yards away from the studio in the lot, and it was built on rostrums about 6 feet high. So when she fell off, she was literally falling on 6 feet instead of 300 feet. And Popper Day did the painting, point of view painting of the valley as seen from them. Was brilliant at it. He painted absolute perfect pictures, looking almost like a photograph. This is the famous shot when I shot with a #2 fog filter. It's so unnoticeable, you know, but Technicolor were outraged because that was forbidden at that time. And the next morning we got a note from Technicolor, a message on the phone to say that the previous day's work was completely ruined. And I felt sick. And they said they knew it was important because it was Deborah's last day on the film. So we trooped in to see the rushes they'd brought over specially to show us. And the moment I saw it on the screen, I knew it was good. And Michael said, "Wonderful, Jack. This is just what I wanted." And he turned to Technicolor. He said, "It's about time you learned something about art and movies and so on." He gave him a lecture. Technicolor was a very exacting process. And that's why there was someone on the set all the time. There was a certain tyranny about the color consultants. And Mrs. Kalmus, who was the wife of Dr. Kalmus, who had brought the process out, she was in charge of making sure that all the sets, the colors were right, and even white shirts had to be dipped in dye so that they were graded from 1 to 5 so that they weren't too glaring white.